I was homeless. I became the commissioner for the largest social services in the nation. If you gave up on me, I would not be where I am today. Shelter is temporary. Yeah. It is not permanent. But if you put a person in a home, you provide the services they need, that's a better investment.
Because somebody in a shelter is still homeless, instead of investments into housing, which ends homelessness.
Sometimes the rent is too damn high. New York City is a great city, but it's an expensive city.
NYSSHP pays for about 20,000 different households across New York State. It hasn't received an increase in those 40 years. We can't let this hemorrhaging keep happening. People are losing their homes.
Every grant should have 10% allocated to advocacy.
Yes.
Because if you don't change policy, the mess still continues.
Yes.
It's important to hold strong women up. Their voice changes policy and will impact thousands of people across this state. And so we owe them a debt.
We need to advocate. We need to hear from folks with lived experience, not us telling them what they need, but them telling us what they need in order to thrive and survive.
Speak even though your voice may shake. What you're saying is needed at this time. There's times to rest, there's times to cry, but there's always time to get back to the streets, get back to the work.
Homelessness didn't just happen. Policy created it, and policy can solve it. This week on Homeless Unfiltered podcast, we're talking about supportive housing, advocacy, dignity, and what it actually takes to change systems that keep people homeless. Gary P. Jenkins went from living in a homeless shelter as a child to becoming the commissioner of New York City's Department of Social Services. Today, he serves as interim chief executive officer at Urban Pathways, helping homeless New Yorkers move from the streets into permanent supportive housing. Pascale Leone is the executive director of the Supportive Housing Network of New York, where she works alongside hundreds of organizations fighting to preserve and expand supportive housing across the state. We unpack why homelessness is exploding in America, how decades of disinvestment created the crisis we see today, why supportive housing works, the evidence shows, proves it works, and why criminalization only makes homelessness worse. We dive into advocacy, how people with lived experience are changing policy, what actually moves lawmakers, and the importance of organizing, and why advocacy fatigue cannot stop us for fighting for housing, healthcare, and human dignity. This isn't just a conversation about homelessness in New York. It's a conversation about the future of housing policy in America. Well, thank you very much for joining me. We were once on a panel, so we know each other.
Yes, well,
but Gary, I've never met you before. Tell me a little bit about who you are and your work.
Okay, Gary P. Jenkins from New York City, born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm the youngest of 8 kids, single-parent household. Grew up on cash assistance. Back then it was called welfare. I'm a New Yorker and with lived experience. At one point in time, my family and I lived in a shelter, in a hotel, for a little over a year and a half. So I come to this work not as work. I have a passion and a calling for it. Yeah. It really penetrates with me. I am now the interim CEO at Urban Pathways, a nonprofit organization where we provide services to unhoused individuals through outreach, through our drop-in centers, through our safe havens, and through our permanent supportive housing.
Yeah. Pascale, even though we know each other, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure, I'll start at the background. I am the daughter of Haitian immigrants. I always consider myself an advocate as a child, and I always say not by necessary choice, but by circumstances. I grew up in the era of the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the early 80s, and so Haitians were really vilified during that time. And so one of my earliest opportunities to organize was with my mom, who, when I look back, was the first organizer I knew. She was a union. She was a nurse for about almost 40 years, the Nurses Association, also the Haitian Nurses Association. But in 1990, I marched with about 50,000 other Haitians and supporters where they called us the bad blood and accusing Haitian people.
How old were you?
I was 9.
Wow.
Yeah. So for me, that's when it meant that really policy and bad policy can have such detrimental effects. And so I devoted my life to organizing, really cut my teeth in the reproductive justice world. But it was there that I found out that housing is health. Working in the public health sector. And so I was at CSH, the Corporation for Supportive Housing, for about 9 years. And
We've
now,
heard of them.
Yeah, you heard of them? Yeah, small national organization. And now I'm the executive director of the Supportive Housing Network of New York. We go by Shinny, we go by network. I'll respond to both. And we are the statewide membership and advocacy group. And so we represent over 200 nonprofits like Urban Pathways that provide services. There are developers, operators of supportive housing. We also represent about over 170 affiliates and corporate members. So that's anyone between developers, property management, even to laundry services that are part of our membership. But we're very clear about the proliferation of more supportive housing. We have over 65,000 units in New York State, about more than 40,000 in New York City alone. And so we are clear on mission and work with our partners on every side at all levels to make sure that supportive housing is here for the long term.
Yeah. Let's talk about homelessness in New York City and then New York State.
Yeah.
Sure. So, we in New York City, we have what's called a right to shelter, which means New York. If you come to New York City, if you are in New York City and you present yourself as homeless, the city of New York have to find a place for you to live. So at Urban Pathways, we want to meet people where they are. We believe in housing first.
Right.
We believe if you get someone into a unit, you can provide the supportive services that they need. So again, we do outreach on the street within Manhattan, and we reach the people where they are, and we try to build that trust and bring them inside into one of our drop-in centers, into one of our safe havens, which is our low barrier. Folks can come in and we just provide services to them. No pressure, not a lot of rules, just meet them where they are. But the ultimate goal is to really get them into permanent supportive housing.
Right. Which, going back a little bit, if my memory is correct, right to shelter, the city was sued into doing that.
Yes.
Right to shelter hasn't been the best model because it forced the city to invest in shelters over housing. Correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Can you explain that?
And it's really the investment should be building more homes.
Right.
Building more.
Because otherwise you're just
places.
warehousing people.
Warehousing. And in congregate setting does not work. It's just it's too much investment as far as just a lot of people in places where they don't feel comfortable. But if you put a person in a home, you put a roof over their head, you provide the services they need, that's a better investment. And the data proves it, right? We have folks that stay with us and we can provide those services to them, but they're in their own home, which is so critically important.
And often the right to shelter around the country, people say, oh, look, New York City has right to shelter, but they don't unpack that hasn't necessarily been a really good model because it's forced more investments into shelters, which maintains homelessness because somebody in a shelter is still homeless, instead of investments into housing, which ends homelessness.
Agree, but let me be clear. In New York City, I believe in right to shelter. Everyone has a right to be somewhere, to have a home, to have a roof over their head. But if you make the investment into housing, that's where the real penetration comes in.
Mm-hmm. No, and I'm glad you said that because I think there used to be, and there probably is at some level, this shelter versus housing. And shelter is an important part of a community-wide system. It's housing-focused shelter.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And that has been the big shift.
Right.
So this is where shelter, a right to shelter, whether it's any community in the United States, should be somebody needs to get inside because of weather, because of mental health, because of whatever, they should have the right to shelter. But that shelter shouldn't be the last stop.
Absolutely.
It should be a path or a bridge to housing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that statement. Shelter is temporary. It is not permanent. You come on hard times, you're going through a situation, you go to shelter. I believe in shelter, you should be provided the services you need in order to move on to permanency.
Right.
Right. So you can be self-sustaining within your own home with a roof over your head. And if you need extra services, that's where we can come in and provide those additional services. And I think that's where the government should place their investments.
And if I could jump in here,
Well,
I
please.
think, that court decree Callahan that came in 1981, like let's look at the policies that led to that court decree, right? The chronic disinvestment in housing, HUD being gutted in 1980s, right? The war on drugs, which was really a war on Black and brown people, and a number of converging things is why, we saw what we know now as like chronic street homelessness, which is something that was not a thing, maybe 50 or so years ago, particularly in New York City. As you said, it's not, it has to be part of the continuum, right? It's the front door, but it can't be the last stop, right? And similarly, supportive housing can't be the last stop on the continuum. We do need, and we're seeing folks, particularly post-pandemic, with more acute behavioral and complex needs who can't live independently. And so we need a strong, fortified continuum, but I think it gets back to what you said. Where do we invest our dollars, right? And that's what matters. And so, obviously we're seeing a lot of shelters, particularly after the migrant crisis, but how do we then repurpose some of these shelters to be permanent solutions for New Yorkers who need it?
Yeah. So homelessness in New York State.
So, I'm thinking about the last AHAR because, a certain AHAR hasn't come out just yet.
And for
right?
those, you got to explain
excuse me,
that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Annual homeless assessment report to Congress. I did the right acronym. And so it's based on the point in time count, which happens annually, where folks that are part of the continuum of care, which is the local kind of governing body that brings different stakeholders together in a response to local homelessness, right? And so they organize these point in time counts. All of that data is just kind of funneled into a report to Congress annually that is released around December. And so we don't have 2025, but it's my understanding that we understand there was a decrease in homelessness, which is important, right?
Across the state?
Across the state and across the country is my understanding, but we don't have those numbers. But according to 2024's report, New York had about 140,000 people who are unhoused. Obviously, a majority of these folks are in New York City, but let's be clear. You're from upstate New York. Homelessness is not a city issue. It's not a rural issue. It's not a suburban issue, right? It is a humanity issue. It's the lack of the things that we know, and homelessness, and point blank, that is affordable housing.
As homelessness grows, people are getting frustrated and they're pushing for laws that criminalize homelessness, which will only make the problem worse. Invisible People reaches more people, educating them on homelessness than all other homeless sector nonprofits and campaigns combined. But we do it on a limited budget. We don't have the funding they do. We are mostly funded by individual donations. And now that the economy is struggling, individual donations are disappearing, and we need you. I get it. You might not have the money to donate. Many people are struggling right now. Please share our content, share our videos. It really matters. And if you do have some funds and want to help be part of the solution to solve homelessness, please visit invisiblepeople.tv/donate. Our important work stops without you.
Over the past year in particular, we've been fighting different battles. Federal government who's trying to take people's housing, but then at the state and local, and I want to be clear, New York, I think more than any other state, has provided more resources in not only the development and capital dollars, but also in services and operating. We've had programs. I think the first program for supportive housing is called NYSSHP, the New York State Supportive Housing Program, which came online in 1987. Again, in response to what was happening nationally in the disinvestment in affordable housing. So while we're working to protect and keep people's homes on the federal level, at the state and city level, we're working to preserve what we have. Because if we are just building new and not preserving the homes that we've built sometimes 30, 40 years ago, in buildings that may be over 100 years old, we're going to be running in place. And so our battles really at the state and local level in New York has really been focused on preservation.
I know Binghamton a little bit. I moved to Los Angeles in 1987, went back to take care of my mom. The big difference, and I am pretty sure this is maybe across the state and across the country even. Binghamton, the cost of rent, which is being driven up by the college, developers are, building rental units for SUNY that is driving rent costs up. But you have an economy in Binghamton because most of the industry left. I think same with Rochester and different places that can't afford rent.
Right.
And it's creating homelessness in a city. I remember years ago, they would say there's no homelessness here. And I would go and interview homeless people and say, oh, yes, there are.
Yes.
They're here. And now there's homeless encampments.
Yeah.
And the affordable housing crisis continues to make that worse. And you must see it even more so in New York City because housing costs are, through the roof.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, thank goodness we have a new mayor, Mamdani.
Yeah.
He's all about affordability,
Yeah.
And really looking at low-income New Yorkers and what services they need and require, and looking at the rent, because sometimes the rent is too damn high.
Right.
And New York City is a great city, but it's an expensive city.
Yeah.
And what resources do we have to pour into these individuals who are homeless, who need subsidies, right? They need jobs, the economy, you have to look at that as well. So it's like you have to look at the whole entire picture and not just one section of the picture, right? You have to really paint the picture. Painting the picture is affordability. How can a person afford the rent? Where the economy as far as jobs for these individuals, and then what type of wraparound services they need. And Pascale mentioned earlier in regards to like just really investing in the supportive housing units. If I can go back,
Yeah, please.
you really need to look at those units. They've been this many years.
Yeah.
They need rehab. They need investments. They need, because folks who are unhoused, they're not uneducated, right? So they're not just going to move into a unit that's deplorable. And some may say, oh, but they're living on the street, but they also have pride and dignity.
Exactly.
And they understand that, listen, yes, I'm unhoused, but I really want to be, and you want to encourage them and build that trust to move into a unit that really reflects who they are.
Right.
So making that investment in those supportive housing units that's been there for many years is going to help those individuals come off of the street and go into a unit.
Right. It's so important, and what people don't understand is, from the public's point of view, if we're going to prevent and solve homelessness, you just can't put people in a box that doesn't provide dignity.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
I have a homeless friend. I haven't talked to her in a couple of years, streets in New York, who often will go into whatever services. Could be a shelter, could be some kind of housing, often it's shared housing. And she tells horror stories about that housing. So she goes back out on the streets.
Yes.
So if the point is to reduce and solve street homelessness,
Yeah.
people are human, and we have to provide supportive housing that is something that they can start healing, that they have dignity, that they feel like they're human again, to start going on a path to hopefully self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. And at Urban Pathways, we really approach our clients, our residents with care and compassion. Everyone deserves it, right? So as we deal with our population with care and compassion, as we deal with our staff with care and compassion, as we deal with our vendors with care and compassion, that's how we move forward. And I always tell my story. I was homeless. I became the commissioner for the Department of Social Services, the largest social services in the nation. I am now leading a very reputable nonprofit organization that's been in existence for 51 years. If you gave up on me, I would not be where I am today.
Right.
So we cannot give up on our brothers and sisters who are unhoused.
Yeah. I now know where I know you from.
Okay.
We've met before.
Okay.
But you've been at this event before.
I believe so.
Yes. A formerly homeless person. Barron.
Shams the Baron?
Shams
Shams the Baron,
Yeah.
the homeless hero. Yes,
He is
yes.
now the housing hero, okay?
Yeah. Shams introduced us.
Yes, yes.
That's where I know you
Okay.
from. When you walked in, I was like, I know him.
Yes.
Yeah, so-
Yes. I think what clicked when I said Department of Social Services. Commissioner.
Right. When
Yes.
you said commissioner,
Yes,
because
yes.
you guys did some photo ops.
We did.
You know what
we
I
did.
mean?
We
And
went to
I-
Harts Allen at one point in time.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
yeah. Oh my gosh. So maybe that's something we should unpack. So you were the commissioner of social services for New York City?
For New York City, I started out in that agency at the age of 21. I started out as a frontline staff member, which is the eligibility specialist, and I progressively moved up the ranks until I became commissioner. At the age of 22, I said, before I leave, I'm going to become the commissioner. And why? Not just because I want to be the commissioner. It's not an easy job. But that agency helped my family when we were homeless, and they provided services to us, and it just built a drive in me to want to always give back and help others.
Yeah. Let's talk advocacy.
Yeah.
Because I think especially right now, I know I feel defeated. It's like, does my voice even matter?
Absolutely.
How do we advocate for supportive housing, for right to shelter, for services, for outreach, for healthcare? How can you guide us on a path to better advocacy?
Yeah. Well, thank you for naming it, right? This past year, I think in particular, has felt like the longest, I say decade. I see more gray hairs than I'd like to see in the morning. But what keeps me renewed, and you named all the things, right? One could look at the healthcare crisis, could look at the food assistance issues, looking at the housing as separate and distinct, but they're all interrelated, right? When you're talking about what human needs are and the fact that people don't come in pieces, right? Just because I need housing doesn't mean I need food assistance. And so we as a community need to think of our advocacy in that way too, as a collective, but then also understanding our role. I'm with the Supportive Housing Network. That is my lane, but I am working with our lateral partners on food assistance, on cash assistance, on the things that are in healthcare, right? But leading, where we make sense to and having our lane, but also broadening out. As Martin Luther King said, right? The moral arc of the universe, it's long, but it bends towards justice. And I think, just being in this conference and just being around so many great advocates and hearing the important and centering of joy, because it's been a hard year in so many ways, but we've moved mountains. I look at the fights and the battles we've had, and it's really been like a David and Goliath kind of situation, right? We heard early on the mumblings in January, February, that they were going to gut HUD and all, staff were being let go. And we took to the streets immediately, right? And I think, one of our first rallies on the steps of City Hall, we had 700 advocates, and this was organized in like a week. We worked with 17 different partners, with elected officials, all to say, keep your hands off HUD, keep your hands off housing. New York is not going back to where what we knew happened when HUD was cut and gutted, and the impact, and some of that we're still dealing with today. And so we are very clear-eyed in saying that we're not going back. We have to move forward. We're not going to lose the critical housing that we've had. But it's important to me when we have these wins, whether it be federal and whether Congress not going along with the president's budget, having Republican legislators from New York issue letters to their Republican colleagues saying, let's not cut continuum of care funding, which is the largest funding federal assistance for housing program, as well as the housing opportunities for people with HIV/AIDS, HOPWA funding. To see that kind of momentum, it's because of the advocacy. And so we have to pause, take stock, celebrate each other, but also greet each other with the tenderness, right? We're holding a lot at this time, and we have to acknowledge that. In order for us to be truly in community, we have to be seen and known by one another and understand that we're impacted by all that is coming, at us. Right. There's times to rest. There's times to cry, but there's always time to put your big girl panties on and get back to the streets, get back to the work. And I would say also, so that's, the federal work. I think in this past year, we've had like 7 different rallies across the state, been in certain districts where there was more power to get the issue around gutting HUD and cutting these particular programs weren't at the forefront of our congressional leaders, point blank, like seriously. And if it wasn't for the advocates, particularly the tenants who are leading this charge, with us early in the morning, late at night, we wouldn't have the wins that we've had. And I'll say at the state, as we're fighting to preserve what we have, making sure that our staff are paid a decent wage, they've been leading this fight as well. And we've had substantial wins. And we also have to take stock in that
Can you
and
explain
celebrate.
some of those wins?
Sure. At the state, so as I mentioned, the New York State Supportive Housing Program, NYSSHP, it's the oldest supportive housing program. It pays just for services, with a little bit, about 20% into operations. It hasn't received an increase in those 40 years. And when I first came on in this role, they're like, oh, Pascale, NYSSHP is it's a losing cause, right? It's been the perennial issue. They're never going to fund it. No. What I felt like, what we need to do, we've had there's a lot of different, priorities we have, but everything can't be a priority or nothing will be, right? And so let's focus on NYSSHP. This is the nation's first. While New York has created a number of different programs that are built and modeled off NYSSHP, we can't abandon NYSSHP. NYSSHP pays for about 20,000 different households across New York State. So it is our largest one. Yeah. But we learned about half of them are severely underfunded. And in fact, in the last 20 years, nearly a third of those units had to close their doors because they can't keep up with the cost of everything escalating, paying for staff, the operations. And so we can't let this hemorrhaging keep happening. People are losing their homes. And so we worked with legislators, we worked with tenants. I will say, I want to shout out the organization New Destiny, and particularly the women at New Destiny. We had in November of 2024, we brought the state's women's legislative caucus to meet with a group of tenants, women who are survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. When we were organizing it, they're like, we could stay only for 45 minutes, we can't. When we are in that room and these women shared their truth to power, we were there for about 3 hours.
Wow. Yeah.
The conversations moved legislators that our housing chair called the governor's office that night. And subsequently, we went back to Albany with these incredible women who were at our rallies. We passed the mic, who were in the legislative's office. And in the budget, what did we get? We got $18 million, the largest increase we've ever gotten for NYSSHP in its 40-year history. Absolutely. It's not everything we needed. I'll just put that out there.
Yep.
We asked for $32 million. We got about 18. And that's just year one. So we're still fighting. But, it's important. And when I talk about celebrating, at our annual conference in June, we brought those women up on stage to give them their flowers because it's important. When I met with these women, they told me about how it meant for them to tell their kids what they've done.
Right.
As a daughter of a survivor, I think it's important to hold strong women up. Yeah. And we had them on the stage and just letting them know that not only is their voice powerful, their voice changes policy. Yeah. And it will impact thousands of people across this state. And so we owe them a debt that no amount of funding can, come close to, but we honor and thank them for their partnership.
I can feel the passion coming out of you.
Okay.
That's awesome.
That's how it should be.
So, Gary, I understand your organization, which is a nonprofit, also has advocacy staff and engages in advocacy. I want you to talk about that. But first, have you put back on that commissioner hat? What did you see work as far as advocacy that changed policy or advocacy that just didn't connect?
As a commissioner, I thought it was extremely important to sit at the table with advocates, right? But I also thought it was equally important to sit at the table with people with lived experience. Yeah. So you have organizations such as Shinny, and you have a great leader in Pascale to really bring together and understand the importance of whatever that topic was that they were bringing to me, right? And it wasn't coming from a space of a policymaker. It was really coming from a space of this is what our clientele is telling us and what they need. And that informed me on what policies we should put in place, such as street to home. So when I was the commissioner, I worked with a nonprofit along with Pascale to really develop a pilot And what the pilot really described, as I describe it, is reaching individuals who are unhoused on the street and putting them into an apartment, not bringing them from the street to a shelter,
Right.
to a drop-in center, to a safe
Truly housing
haven,
first.
but truly bringing them from the street into an apartment. And that's the housing first model.
Yeah.
And it works.
Right.
And it's still in existence today. It's Volunteers of America, this is the nonprofit that we worked with. And even to today, they thank me for having an open mind. And I think as appointed agency heads, that's what they need to do. Have an open mind. Advocacy is extremely important. We have a department at Urban Pathways. I was really happy when I came to the organization. It existed. It still exists.
Yeah.
We work with individuals. We have tenant
rare.
associations.
It is rare.
And it's like, we need to advocate. We need to hear from folks with lived experience, not us telling them what they need, but them telling us what they need in order to thrive and survive.
Yeah. What pointers would you give people, both in organizing and, again, what works and what doesn't?
Yeah. I think people get overwhelmed with the thought and the notion, like, is my
Especially
voice?
these days.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it could be scary, right? People think about the risk, but I always think about what do we get if our mouths are closed, right? And, you know, for folks who may be for the first time, I always tell them, you know, speak even though your voice may shake.
Yeah.
What you're saying is so powerful and needed at this time. And so, you know, I guess in some pointers, I think it's important that you find fellowship with folks who are going through similar situations, and recognize, you know, again, there's also power in numbers, right? And a reminder that elected officials work for you. You have every right to go into that office and tell them what you need and what you demand, right? Who else could talk about what it means to be stably housed than the folks who are in it? So you go in there and own it. And then also, particularly for folks with lived experience, you owe them nothing. You don't need to tell them your story. It is your choice. And every time it is a gift and it's acknowledgement that you are sometimes opening wounds that have not healed.
Yeah.
And so the tenderness I was talking about and how we have to come at this work is really important. But just being very clear, again, even if your voice may crack or shake or, you know,
Yeah.
say what you need to say, it's important and it's needed.
Often we will post a video and people are inspired to take action, but they want to send that person money or they want to feed that person because it makes them feel good. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. And I always try to spin it. It is awesome that we posted something that is inspiring you to have empathy and to take action. And the number one way you can help homeless people is by advocating for more affordable housing.
Absolutely. Point
And
blank.
they don't want to do it. They don't, whether they don't see it because it doesn't give that feel good. You know, you hand out a sandwich, and I'm not saying, you hand out a sandwich and, you know, charity serves a purpose. Charity is important. People need clothes. People need food. But charity never solved a social crisis. Yeah. So how do we convince people? Because you're doing it at scale, right? That, hey, this matters. I would think part of it is because you're able to show wins, because advocacy fatigue is big.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you know, I would say, again, as you're sending that GoFundMe, pick up the phone. Call your legislators. If they don't know it's a priority for you, it won't be a priority for them.
Right. Well, GoFundMe has never solved anybody's homelessness.
Nope.
Absolutely. It has not.
It has never solved anybody's homelessness. And people, they get so mad at me. And, you know, first off, they want the person's information. And I'm like, you know, the internet is a scary place.
Absolutely.
Now, if the person asks, then says, hey, you know, I want you to post my PayPal or my Venmo or whatever, I'll do it. But they have to want it. I've actually asked people, can I set up a GoFundMe for you? And they're like, no, I don't want it. And then there can never be a middleman.
Yeah.
right? Because I don't know if you remember what happened in Philadelphia, where there was a couple that found a homeless man and they raised like $400,000.
Was that
Some of them,
DC? Yeah.
yeah, some of them did jail time.
Yes.
Right. So the only way out is, can you set up your own bank account and set up your own GoFundMe so that there's no middleman? I try to 100% of the time saying, that's so awesome that you care. Now let's advocate for affordable housing.
Yep.
And I can't get them to move in that direction.
Yeah.
So what we do at Urban Pathways, we first we applaud folks, right? If you want to give to Urban Pathways,
Yeah.
so we can help individuals that unhoused, give to a nonprofit, because the nonprofit is definitely going to make sure
That's the other
that
thing
money
I-
goes where
Yeah.
it should go. But we also bring individuals to our locations, right? So philanthropy, you want to volunteer, which is great, and we love it, and you want to give out sandwiches. Not sandwiches on the street. Come to our location so
Yeah.
you can actually
Yeah.
see the work in play.
Yeah.
You can actually meet with the residents. You can meet with the staff. You can see how the services are being delivered, and you can actually see the environment that we created for unhoused individuals to keep them inside.
Yeah.
That touches their heart. That they get a better understanding of the services that we provide.
Yeah, no, I often point people into doing exactly what you suggest, because then it's a win-win.
Yes.
Now, these days, since COVID, there's mutual aid groups. I will recommend a mutual aid group, and not so much because they're providing charity, but it will change that person's paradigm when they're out connecting with homeless people on the street. And there's some amazing, I'm talking Los Angeles now.
Right.
There's some amazing mutual aid groups that are coming alongside nonprofits, filling gaps that the nonprofit, I mean, running
absolutely.
HMIS and,
Yes.
really working to get people into housing. So there's value with the mutual aid groups, but I 100% agree with you. And I say to people, I mean, it's awesome. You want to help? I'm sure there's homeless people in your city, right? Grab some socks.
Yes.
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 Give them out. I'm not stopping you.
And if I could put a plug, advocacy is something that, philanthropy is not excited to, especially in these days. And so,
Oh, you had to go there.
I had to go there. And so, we don't get any federal funding or government funding, state, federal, or local. And so, in terms of also, helping to support advocacy, paying for the buses for tenants to come up to
Right.
Albany, helping to, we pay them to
Right.
participate, right? We're
Right,
getting paid
right.
to be there to lobby. And so we
Right.
pay the tenants as well. We provide them with meals, but this is something that we take out of our own general operating dollars. And so I would just put that plug. If advocacy is important, if you can't make it physically yourself to join us in Albany or at City Hall, help us, support others who can.
I don't know if you know who Robert Edgar, he started DC Central Kitchen.
No.
He's an amazing leader in the nonprofit space. And he has always said that every grant should have 10% allocated to advocacy.
Yes.
Yes, I agree with that.
Because if you don't change policy,
Absolutely.
the mess still continues.
Yes.
And funders haven't caught up to that.
Yeah.
They
shout
want
out to those who
Oh,
do.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a lot that do.
there's
but yeah.
some
Mhm.
change,
Yeah.
but it's also scary. There's some
is.
funders getting out of
Yeah.
supporting homeless altogether.
Yes.
And that is really scary because
Yes.
it's at a time when we need more help.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah. The headwinds are strong.
Yes, yes, yes. So, oh my gosh, so many things that we could talk about. I didn't know you had lived experience. One of our writers, and I started we're a news publisher, and one of our writers, I started the whole news publishing 7 years ago because her and her husband lived in a New York City shelter for 9 months, and she could write about it.
Yes.
Firsthand experience, and it was so powerful, and it pushed our journalism in a direction. So, you having that experience has just shaped your work.
It really has. I just recently published a book
Oh, wow.
called Never Give Up.
How do people find it?
Amazon or Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
You just type in "Never
Got
Give
it.
Up" Gary P. Jenkins.
Got it.
It pops up. But I wrote the book not just to just tell my story, but it was really to give back to others. Right? It was a terrifying experience. I'm gonna be honest. But I wanted folks to understand that their current circumstances does not define where you can go in life.
Yep.
And I'm talking to my unhoused brothers and sisters. You're going through a situation right now, but it's not your end game. You can become the commissioner of the largest social services agency in the nation.
Wow.
You can lead a nonprofit. You can be and do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
But of course, you need resources and support to help you along the way. So within the book, I describe some of that, of my journey, of how I got to where I am.
Yeah. What gives you hope?
Hearing honestly from impacted people on finding a new sense of purpose in this work, having found stability, but also feeling that they have to pay it forward so selflessly, that gives me hope. And then also, everything is temporary, right? This nation has been through worse.
Right.
And, I'm hopeful we won't get, farther down in the pits of hell that we are right now. But at the same time, what gives me hope is that we're seeing people kind of an awakening to what some of us have been knowing for a long time, and getting over the tribalism and the partisan and just realizing it's about humanity. Let's center that. And so this awakening is giving me hope.
Gary?
It's the people that we serve each and every day. I'm really fortunate and blessed to see the impact on a daily basis of individuals who are going through their challenges just like the rest of us, but now receiving the support they need. That drives me. That wakes me up every morning with the passion in my belly to say, keep moving forward. Keep doing this together. And I don't want to also forget the staff that provide the
Yes.
services
Yes.
because they're low wage. It is.
Yeah.
And I recognize that. And we all collectively need to do something about that to keep those folks at a living wage where they can continue to provide the services to unhoused individuals.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I should have added the hope to, New York City and using the pun, we're in a new era, right? We have leadership who are taking the issues around homelessness and housing insecurity really serious, having new voices at the table. So it's an exciting time to be in New York City right now.
I totally agree with that statement. I am inspired by Mayor Mondani and the folks that he's bringing on and around him to support him to move the vision forward. It is definitely a new era.
Great. Well, thank you all for spending time with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.